Hi, I'm Nathan Wildman. Thank you very much for sort of coming to this talk entitled A Potential Contradiction. So the aim of this talk is, well, it very much falls in broad modal metaphysics wheelhouse, and we'll get along to the aim shortly. What I want to do is really briefly start with some background. So one of the big topics within metaphysics over the last, we'll say, 70 years has been making sense or providing an account of the notion of metaphysical modality. And what we really mean here is that there are things like possibility, necessity, counterfactuals, the modal aspects of laws of nature, maybe even the notion of essence. We'll call these this whole modal package. And the task, if you like, is to make sense of this whole package. And there have been two broad camps that kind of approach it. The first one tries to give what we might think of as a fully reductive account. So we're going to analyze all the modal package, all the modal notions, in terms of something non-modal. Now, by far, the most infamous version here is Lewis's genuine modal realism. Some forms of conventionalism might fit in here. Maybe a kind of quasi-realist approach might fit in here. We're not really going to say much about these fully reductive accounts. Alternatively, we might offer what we'll call a partially reductive account. And here what we do is we take one broadly modal notion as fundamental or primitive, right, or at least foundational for our purposes, and make sense of all the other ones in terms of it. So probably the most infamous version here is Feinean essentialism, where we take essences as our foundation, and then we make sense of the rest of modal stuff in terms of it. Another version of this partially reductive story that's really kind of taken off is what we'll call dispositionalism. And the idea here is that we start off with dispositions. So these are broadly modal properties possessed by actual concrete objects. Things like fragility, right? And the idea will be, hey, the object having this disposition then gives us possibility claim, right? So if my mug has the disposition of fragility, that means that possibly the mug breaks. And there's a tight connection then between possessing the disposition and the possibility claim being true. And then once we have that, we can make sense of the rest of the modal package. This view looks really neat. And a lot of people, I think, have really expanded upon it in the past, in the most recent past. So one thing that's really attractive about this view is it looks like it gives us a very natural ontological picture. We have objects, right, possessing these modal properties. So this sort of modality is anchored in the properties of concrete ordinary objects. That looks nice. Even better, and probably the most attractive feature of this view, is that it looks like it gives us a good modal epistemology, or at least a good start on modal epistemology. Because we seem to pretty clearly have good knowledge about the dispositions of many of the objects around us. So we've got a grip on the thing that, on this view, is the foundation of the rest of the modal stuff. So that puts us at least in what seems to be pretty good standing to then make sense of the rest of the modal stuff, at least provide some kind of epistemology for it. However, there's one pretty significant problem, which we might think of as an extensionality issue. So again, I said that the basics of this view is to connect possibilities with dispositions. Here's a problem. It seems like possibly the Golden Gate Bridge breaks is true. However, it seems like the Golden Gate Bridge is disposed to break is false. So what disposition is it that's going to ground or explain the possibility claim here? How do we get out that possibly the Golden Gate Bridge breaks? Doesn't look like there's a really obvious story, and there's plenty of moves to be made here. But this kind of, I think, highlights a big challenge for the dispositionalist, which, as Contessa puts it, is to provide a full-fledged account of modality without flying in the face of our most central pre-theoretical beliefs about what's possible. Right? We want possibly the Golden Gate Bridge breaks to be true. Not really immediately obvious how to tell a good dispositional story. Enter Barbara Vetter. Right? So in 2015, Barbara Vetter's Potentiality came out. Excellent book. Vetter offers a really ingenious solution here. Right? And the idea is, right, what we're going to do is we're going to replace our usual conception of dispositions with what she calls potentialities. And potentialities include but they go beyond or extend beyond dispositions and abilities. So there are these modal properties that objects have, and we're still going to get the same anchoring of possibilities inside the properties of objects, right? But they're not going to be broadly dispositional. And the structure of potentialities is going to allow Vedder to dodge or handle or dismiss many of the problems that crop up with traditional dispositionalism. And the core kind of story here is going to be this principal possibility, which links possibility claims with potentialities, right, not dispositions. And once we have this sort of link between dispositions potentialities and possibilities, we can build the rest of the modal package from there. So Vedder's view is really cool, and I very much suggest going and reading her book. It's great. And Vedder's account, this sort of potentiality-based account, looks to be a really valuable contribution to this larger project of making sense of metaphysical modality. But, you know, I've got to stay in business, so what I really want to do is kind of tweak Vedder's view a little bit. In particular, my aim here is to show that as it's presented, Vedder's potentiality-based view entails contradicting modal claims. And the upshot is going to be that, look, at minimum, the view needs to be substantially modified. Exactly how, I'm not really going to discuss here. I'm just here to raise a problem. So that's really the aim. And the plan is going to be pretty simple. I'm very quickly going to give you a crash course on Vedder's view about potentialities. Then I'm going to detail 5 central points that her view is committed to. All of these she takes to be built into her account. Then we're going to take these 5 and we're going to use them to derive some contradictory modal claims. That's the problem. And then we'll all go home happy. So that's the plan. Let's go ahead and get started with this crash course on Vedder's view about potentialities. So, as the name suggests, potentialities are the potential to manifest some condition. In this sense, they're like dispositions, but unlike dispositions, which we take to have a kind of conditional structure with a stimulus condition and then some manifestation, potentialities just have the manifestation. And by not having this kind of conditional structure, Vedder can get around some of the problems that, in fact, she has really raised for traditional dispositionalist accounts. So, right, potentialities are just this broadly modal property of being able to, or can manifest some condition P. And this already highlights a tight connection between having the potential and can, this metaphysical can. As Vedder puts it, right, an object X has the potential to F if and only X can F. And it's very natural to read the can there as just simply another way of saying possibly X Fs. So this is the kind of key connection that's really the foundational element for Vedder's view. What's notable is, again, these potentialities, we don't really care about the sort of circumstances that bring about the manifestation. We don't care about the stimulus condition. It just drops out. All that matters is the manifestation. Right? So if we go back to our point about the Golden Gate Bridge, right, we don't really care exactly what circumstances need to be such in order for the bridge to break. Right? It has the potential to break because it can break. And that's enough. And then we already get around the kind of extensionality problem we raised with the more traditional dispositionalist approach. And that's one of the most ingenious moves that Vedder has. But this walks into a new version of the extensionality problem, which is that, cool, like, how do we recover back our dispositional talk? That is, right, lots of things have the potential to break, but only some of these things are genuinely fragile. So how do we mark the difference between the things that are genuinely fragile and the stuff like the Golden Gate Bridge that can break but aren't fragile? So probably the cleverest move, right? Potentialities, Vedder's potentialities, come in degrees. So a fragile vase and the Golden Gate Bridge both have the potential to break, right? But the vase has the potential to a much greater degree. And importantly, we can then recover back dispositional talk by allowing context to fix exactly where the sort of degree cutoff is. So context might be such that Right? The fragile vase is deemed to be fragile because it has the potential to a certain degree, and this degree is greater than or equal to whatever our context takes to be the threshold for counting as fragility. And this already suggests something, right? And this is something that's going to be very important for when we raise our problem, is that these degrees are going to come in a kind of spectrum. So at the minimum degree, an object has the potential, it's just simply possible for the object to manifest the potential. Exactly how, what the circumstances are, the stimulus conditions, irrelevant. It's just like, look, this thing can do the potential, can manifest. At the other end of the spectrum, the maximal degree, right, not only can the object manifest this potential, but the object has no potential whatsoever to not manifest the disposition, to not manifest. Right? So notably, right, if an object has a potential to the maximal degree, what this suggests is it simply lacks the potential to do its kind of complement, right? So just hypothetically, if something had breakability, the potential to break to the maximal degree, there would be no potential for it to not break. It would always be breaking. So this kind of spectrum point is very important for what we're going to do. That's really all that matters. There's a lot more to Vedder's view. I think it's very worth going and reading her book. But I just want to highlight the stuff that's relevant for our conversation. So cool. On to the 5 key commitments. So the first one of Vedder's view that really is important is that objects change what degree of potentiality they possess over time. So for example, when I was younger, right, I had the potential to be a child actor. However, as I got older, I lost this potential. Right? Once I was no longer a child, it looks like I don't have that potential anymore. It kind of goes away over time. Similarly, as I remain in Tilburg and it gets closer and closer to becoming 30 August, right, I possess the potential to be in Utrecht on 29 August to a lesser and lesser degree. Right? As the day kind of ticks along, the degree of the potential I have for being in Utrecht on that particular day goes away. Right now, it's pretty good, right? Because the 29th, at least the time of recording, is a few days away. But once it clicks to 30 August, right, my degree of potentiality for being in Utrecht on the 29th, if I never went, becomes 0. So our second key point, is that some potentialities are what we'll call past concerning potentialities. And these are potentialities whose manifestation must be grounded in the possession of some property in the past. So there's a couple different ways these can go. The easiest ones are ones that feature temporal indices denoting earlier times. So say, being in Tilburg on 1 January 2020, right? Or they might feature past tense predicates. So being a former child actor. Notably, Vedder thinks that whether a potential is past concerning is something that changes over time. So being in Tilburg on 30 August is not now past concerning, but it will be by next Monday, i.e. on the 31st. At that point, then it will have to involve, the only way I could possess it would be if, in fact, I had some property in an earlier time, say being in Tilburg on that day. The third point is that because we can't change the past concerning potentialities are what we'll call trivial. We can flesh this out with a principle Vedder calls triviality. And as past concerning potentialities are possessed the maximal degree if they are possessed at all. Now notably, 1, 2, and 3 entail that over time, an object can go from possessing a potential to a non-maximal degree to possessing the same potential to a maximal degree. Again, take my potential for being in Tilburg. We'll take potential for being in Tilburg on 24 August 2020. It was non-maximal prior to today, assuming you're watching it on the 24th, right? But it's maximal today and hereafter, assuming, of course, that I was in fact in Tilburg on that day. Right? So, again, the key here, some potentials are past concerning. Some potentials, we can change the degree that we possess them over time. And right, These past concerning potentialities are possessed to the maximal degree if they're possessed at all. So when we link these all together, it looks like some potentials will go from non-maximal to maximal. That's the key takeaway here. Our fourth point is what Vedder tells us about the maximal notion of potentiality. This is what we'll call the weak necessity conception, right? A potential is possessed to the maximal degree by an object just in case the object can do nothing other than manifest it. And put another way, right? Objects necessarily manifest all those potentials that they possess the maximal degree. Necessarily, right? If the object exists, then it manifests its potential. I take it that's what this sort of conception of maximal potentiality means. And our last one is something we've already seen, which is Vedder's analysis of metaphysical possibility. Right? So again, this is just that if it's possible that P, then something has had or will have an iterated potentiality for it to be the case that P. We're going to ignore this notion of iterated potentiality because it doesn't actually impact the argument we're going to make. So those are our 5 commitments. Again, the real key is that some of them can go from non-maximal to maximal. When they're maximal, they become weakly necessary. Right? And then Vedder's view about how to get possibilities from potentialities. We're going to stitch these together and generate contradictory modal claims. So, just to use an example, let's take the potential to exist be in Utrecht on 24 August 2020. So this is a potential I possess. In fact, up until the 24th, right, I've possessed both this potential and its, we'll call, complement to a non-maximal degree. That is, potentially, I exist and I'm in Utrecht on the 24th, and potentially I exist and I'm not in Utrecht on the 24th. Say I'm in Berlin or London or Tilburg. Right? Now, given possibility, the fact that I have these potentials to non-maximal, non-zero degree, right, entails 2 different possibility claims. First, possibly, I exist and I'm in Utrecht on the 24th, and possibly I exist and I'm not in Utrecht on the 24th. So far, so good. Now let's suppose, as is likely the case, that I spent the whole of the 24th in Tilburg. Right? So what happens? Well, throughout the 24th, the degree to which I possessed these 2 relevant potentialities, right, these 2 ones here, it changes. The degree for being in Utrecht would have gradually decreased because it becomes harder and harder for me to manifest it. There's fewer, if you like, possible worlds where I can actually do it. And the degree to not being in Utrecht would have gradually increased because it becomes harder and harder for me to not be in Utrecht, or easier and easier, I should say, for me to not be in Utrecht. Because again, it's just the flip to being harder to get there. So what will happen is, over time, this process will continue until the end of the day. And at the end of the day, the transition for the 24th, right, to the 25th, something really metaphysically significant happens. That is, at the end of the day, both potentials become past concerning. Right? And assuming I did stay in Tilburg that whole day, then my degree for being in Tilburg drops to 0. I no longer have the potential to be in Utrecht on the 24th. On the flip side, the degree for not being in Utrecht raises to the maximal degree. Right? Because I just manifest it. I have to manifest it. It's a past concerning potentiality, right, that now I did in fact just do. So per triviality, my potential for not being in Utrecht on the 24th is now something I have to the maximal degree. Cool. Now, per the necessity conception of maximal potentialities, my possessing this potential to maximal degree means I cannot fail to manifest it if I exist. Right? That's just definitive of this necessity conception of maximal potentiality. So, what we've said so far entails the truth of this necessity claim. Necessarily, if I exist, then I'm not in Utrecht on 24 August. Now note, this is logically equivalent to it's not possible that I exist and am in Utrecht on 24 August 2020. Now you can see the problem, because now we've got a contradiction. Remember that earlier, my having a certain potential to a non-maximal, non-minimal degree gave us 1, like this possibility claim. But the gradual shift to its becoming maximal, its complement becoming maximal, means that we have the truth of 4, which is just its negation. And there's our contradicting modal claims. Right? And in fact, it's really easy to generalize this problem. So suppose at some time t0, object A has the potential to p and the potential to not p, where p features a temporal index denoting a later time t1. And at t1, let's just say A manifest p. Consider some later time t2, when p has become a past concerning potential. Right? Given triviality, at t2, A's potential to p has possessed the maximal degree. Right? That's just what triviality tells us. Well, by the necessity conception, A's having the potential to p to the maximal degree means A can't fail to manifest p. So again, we get this. Right? But A's having the potential to not p at time t0, together with Vedder's notion of possibility, right? The one that goes from possessing potentiality to the truth of some possibility claim, entails that A could fail to manifest P, i.e. it looks like we might have something like possibly A exists and isn't P. But now we've just got a contradiction, right? We've got not possibly A exists and not P, and possibly A exists and not P. And that's bad. And note, it doesn't really matter what we pick. All that matters is it looks like it can be one of these potentials that at some point we have to a non-maximal degree, and then at a later point it goes to a maximal degree. That's the problem. Cool. So let's just wrap up. So the problem that we talked about, again, was this issue of it looks like the view is going to give us contradicting modal truths. Right? And where did the problem stem from? Well, it emerges from a combination of the following. Allowing an object's potentiality degrees to go from non-maximal to maximal over time. Understanding maximal degrees in terms of something like weak necessity. Right? And holding that an object's ever having the potential, right, to f to any non-zero degree entails that possibly AFs. Right? Now, what's notable is that all 3 of these look kind of central to Vedder's picture. And because of that, it's not really clear how best to develop things in order to avoid the problem. But we have to modify something in order to get around the problem. And until we do, it looks like this kind of broadly potentialist story is going to be problematic. Now, I don't think this is necessarily fatal. I think there might be moves to make. I'm hopeful that some of you guys will suggest some things. Again, this is meant to be given in a spirit of, actually, I really like this potentiality view, and I'm trying to help it. It's, I want the view to become stronger. Not meant to be necessarily an attack. Anyway, thank you guys very much. I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to talking about this with you in comments in some way. Cheers.